A shocking secret hidden behind a guest house in Albuquerque. A sudden demolition order uncovers a protected federal witness. As the FBI steps in and the media frenzy erupts, can former agent DeShawn Miller protect both the witness and his sanctuary from a power-hungry HOA president? Don't miss what happens next. You won't believe your eyes. The first volley in the war against DeShawn Miller's peace arrived not with a bang, but with the crinkle of official-looking paper. It was a Tuesday morning in late August 2023, the New Mexico sun already baking the adobe walls of his Albuquerque home. DeShawn, 42, a man whose past as a federal agent was a tightly locked vault, was in his backyard, tending to the chilly ristros he'd hung to dry. The small, detached casita at the far end of his property stood silent, its windows reflecting the clear desert sky. It was his sanctuary within a sanctuary, or so he thought. "Mr. Miller?" The voice was saccharine, edged with an authority that grated on DeShawn's nerves before he even turned. Celia Grant, 61, president of the equally saccharinely named Desert Bloom Estates Homeowners Association, stood at his open side gate. She was a woman whose meticulously coiffed silver hair and perfectly pressed pantsuits seemed an affront to the rugged beauty of the landscape. In her hand, she held a clipboard like a scepter. "Grant," DeShawn acknowledged, his voice a low rumble, devoid of warmth. He didn't invite her in. He never did. Their interactions, few and far between, were always transactional, usually involving some pedantic interpretation of HOA bylaws he'd unknowingly breached. Grass a quarter-inch too long, trash cans visible for an hour too many. "We have a slight issue, Mr. Miller," Celia began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Regarding the auxiliary structure on your property," she gestured with her pen toward the casita. "It appears there's no record of a building permit for its construction." DeShawn's jaw tightened. The casita had been there when he bought the house 5 years ago, a relic from a previous owner, likely built decades before the Desert Bloom Estates HOA even existed. Back when this land was more desert than bloom, he'd refurbished it, yes, run new plumbing, upgraded the electrical, but the footprint was original. That structure is grandfathered in. Grant, it predates your HOA's meticulous record-keeping. "Ah, but that's where you might be mistaken," Celia said, tapping her clipboard. "According to county records, which we've diligently cross-referenced, any substantial renovation or alteration requires a new permit, and as you know, all external structures must comply with the Desert Bloom architectural guidelines, which this casita clearly does not, in its current iteration." She paused for effect. "Therefore, the HOA board has issued a notice of violation. You have 30 days to demolish the unpermitted structure and restore the area to its original, undeveloped state." DeShawn stared at her, the arid breeze suddenly feeling colder. "Demolish it?" The word was an absurdity. "You can't be serious." "I am entirely serious, Mr. Miller." Celia's smile became a thin, triumphant line. "Failure to comply will result in daily fines, and eventually, while the HOA will contract for the demolition itself, billing all associated costs to you, plus administrative fees." "Of course." She slid a folded paper from her clipboard and extended it. "Here is the official notice. All the details are outlined within." He took the paper, his fingers stiff. It felt like a declaration of war. This wasn't about a building permit or architectural guidelines. This was about something else. Celia Grant had always had an almost obsessive interest in his quiet, secluded life. His lack of engagement in community potlucks, his curt responses, his very presence as a black man in a predominantly older, white neighborhood. It all seemed to fuel her intrusive curiosity. "This is harassment, Grant," DeShawn said, his voice dangerously low. "It's enforcement of community bylaws, Mr. Miller," she corrected, her tone unwavering. "For the good of the neighborhood, we must maintain standards." She gave a curt nod, turned, and walked away, her sensible heels clicking on the gravel path. DeShawn unfolded the notice, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. 30 days. 30 days to dismantle a part of his home, a part that held a significance Celia Grant couldn't possibly fathom. Inside that casita, under the deepest, most unofficial cover, lived Tina Alvarez. Tina, 33, was the linchpin witness in the federal case against the Juarez-Torres cartel's Albuquerque operations, a case DeShawn had been instrumental in building before he'd left the bureau under a cloud of exhaustion and disillusionment. He'd taken her off the official witness protection grid when it became clear there was a leak. A mole high up who was feeding information to the cartel, keeping her alive, keeping her silent until the trial, was a promise he'd made, a promise that now had a 30-day demolition notice hanging over it. He crumpled the paper in his fist. The heat of the day suddenly felt oppressive. This wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was a direct threat to Tina's life and the integrity of a major federal investigation. Celia Grant, in her quest for neighborhood conformity, had just stumbled into a hornet's nest, and she had no idea of the sting she was about to provoke. The problem wasn't just beginning, it had detonated. His past, the one he tried so hard to bury in the New Mexico dust, was about to be exhumed, and the quiet life he'd meticulously constructed was about to shatter. He looked towards the casita, a grim understanding dawning. He wasn't just fighting for a building, he was fighting for a life, and against a system that had, once again, found a way to corner him. The desert wind whispered through the eaves, carrying a premonition of the storm to come. The crumpled HOA notice felt like a live grenade in DeShawn's hand. His first instinct, honed by years in federal service, was to assess the threat and secure the asset. Tina. He glanced towards the casita, its unassuming facade now a glaring vulnerability. He needed to talk to her, to gauge her state, but not yet. First, he had to understand the enemy's full capabilities. Celia Grant was a petty tyrant, yes, but one armed with bylaws and the righteous indignation of the bored and overzealous. He smoothed out the notice on his outdoor table, rereading the specific codes cited. They were flimsy, easily contestable if this were just about a building. But it wasn't. It was about the woman inside, and the wolves Celia might unwittingly lead to her door. He spent the next hour online, cross-referencing county records, HOA meeting minutes he'd previously ignored, and any public information on Celia Grant. She was thorough. He'd give her that. The HOA had recently updated its enforcement protocols, spearheaded by Grant, giving the board more aggressive avenues for non-compliance. This wasn't a sudden whim, it was a calculated move. His mind raced. Moving Tina now was risky. She was settled, as much as one could be in her situation. Uprooting her would mean finding another secure location, off-grid, untraceable, a near impossibility on short notice, without resources he no longer officially commanded. He had to fight this, stall it, make it so legally convoluted and unpleasant that Celia Grant would back down. But Celia wasn't his only problem. The Juarez-Torres cartel wasn't known for its patience or subtlety. If word of any instability around Tina's sanctuary got out, they'd pounce. And how long could he keep this escalating HOA dispute contained before it drew unwanted attention? Later that afternoon, under the pretense of a routine check-in, he visited the casita. Tina Alvarez, her dark hair pulled back, was sketching in a worn notepad. The silence of her sanctuary usually a comfort, but today she sensed the shift in him immediately. "What's wrong, Des?" she asked, her voice quiet, an accent from her South Texas upbringing still evident. "You look like I've seen a ghost," he finished, forcing a grim smile. More like a meticulously organized busybody with a demolition order. He explained the situation, careful to downplay the immediate danger but stressing the potential complications. Tina's face, already etched with the strain of months in hiding, tightened. "So this HOA woman, she wants to tear this place down? With me in it?" The fear in her eyes was palpable, but beneath it, a familiar flicker of anger. She'd lost everything because of the cartel. This little house was the only semblance of stability she had left. "She doesn't know you're here, Tina, and she won't. DeShawn said, his tone firm. This is about property. As far as she's concerned, I'll handle it. But handling it was proving more complex than anticipated. His initial attempts to reason with other HOA board members, to point out that Casita's long-standing presence, were met with polite but firm deferrals to Celia Grant. She had consolidated her power effectively. His carefully constructed anonymity was beginning to fray. Neighbors he'd only ever nodded to now cast curious, sometimes suspicious, glances his way. Whispers undoubtedly followed Celia's version of events. The uncooperative recluse, the flagrant code violator. The twist came 3 days later. Not from Celia, but from a direction DeShawn had dreaded and, in some ways, expected. 2 dark sedans, an unwelcome echo of his past life, pulled up outside his house. Special Agent Mark Olson, a former colleague, now looking grayer and more tired, stepped out, along with a younger agent DeShawn didn't recognize. Olson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "DeShawn, we need to talk, inside." His eyes flicked towards the casita, a silent acknowledgement of the real reason for their visit. Once in his living room, Olson cut to the chase. "We picked up chatter, increased cartel interest in Albuquerque, specifically rumors about a package being held here. Then, one of our local assets flagged an unusual HOA dispute involving a property known to be your residence, a dispute centered around a secondary dwelling." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "This demolition order, DeShawn, it's ringing alarm bells all the way up to DC. What the hell is going on?" DeShawn felt a cold knot in his stomach. He'd tried to keep Tina off the FBI's compromised radar, but it seemed the periphery was just as dangerous. The HOA president is on a power trip. It's a zoning dispute, nothing more. "Don't bullshit me, Miller!" Olson snapped, his professional patience wearing thin. "A zoning dispute that could expose our primary witness in the Torres case? You know the stakes. If Celia Grant brings in a demolition crew, what do you think happens when they find Tina Alvarez living in that shed you're so attached to? Best case, the media has a field day, and Tina's cover is blown sky high. Worst case," Olson didn't need to finish, "the cartel would find her." "I'm managing it," DeShawn insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "Managing it?" The younger agent, Special Agent Davies, spoke for the first time, his tone sharp. "Our intel suggests Mrs. Grant isn't just filing notices. She's been seen photographing your property extensively. She's been making inquiries about expedited demolition permits with the city. This isn't just managing, this is a ticking clock, and it's getting louder." Before DeShawn could respond, Davies' phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression hardening. "Sir, you need to see this." He handed the phone to Olson. Olson read the screen, his face grim. He then showed it to DeShawn. It was a link to a local news blog. The headline blaring, "HOA Showdown in Desert Bloom. Resident defies demolition order. Cites privacy concerns." Below it, a photo of DeShawn's house, clearly taken from the street, with the casita visible in the background. And a quote attributed to a concerned neighbor, undoubtedly Celia. "We just want compliance with the rules that keep our community beautiful and safe. Some people think they're above those rules." The media, Celia had escalated, bypassing quiet intimidation and going public. The hornets weren't just stirred, the nest had been kicked, and it was now front-page news in Albuquerque. The carefully constructed walls around Tina Alvarez were crumbling, not from a bulldozer, but from a news report and a vindictive HOA president. The situation had just gone from critical to catastrophic. The glow of the news blog on Olson's phone cast a harsh light on DeShawn's grim face. Celia hadn't just kicked the hornet's nest. She'd broadcast its location to the world, his carefully guarded privacy, Tina's fragile security, all shattered by a petty squabble weaponized by local media. "This is exactly what we were trying to avoid. Miller!" Olson's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Every lowlife connected to Torres will be crawling over this. The media will be camped on your doorstep. How do you propose to manage that?" DeShawn felt a surge of cold anger, not just at Celia, but at the system that had repeatedly failed Tina, forcing him into this untenable position. "She left me no choice," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She wants a war over a tool shed. She'll get one." But he knew bravado wouldn't protect Tina. He needed leverage, and fast. "We're pulling Tina out," Olson stated, more an order than a suggestion. "We have a provisional safe house in Arizona. It's not ideal, but it's better than this circus." "No," DeShawn said flatly. "You move her now, with this media spotlight, and you confirm every rumor. You'll have cartel spotters on her like flies. She stays here. I'll handle Celia. You handle the external threats your leak brought to our doorstep." It was a gamble, a direct challenge to Olson's authority, but DeShawn knew the official channels were compromised. He trusted his own instincts more. Olson looked like he was about to explode, but the younger agent, Davies, intervened. "Sir, Miller might have a point. Moving her now is high risk. If he can neutralize the local issue, contain the media, it might buy us time to find a more secure, long-term solution." DeShawn seized the opening. "Celia Grant wants a fight based on rules and regulations? Fine. I used to write those rule books." He turned to Olson. "I need a temporary hold. Some kind of federal injunction. Anything to stop that demolition order. Cite national security. Ongoing investigation. Whatever gives you the broadest cover. Buy me 48 hours. Olson scrubbed a hand over his face. The situation was a jurisdictional nightmare. "I can try to raise it with the U.S. attorney. Claim the property is material to an ongoing investigation. But it's thin, DeShawn. And if the press gets wind of that, it's less thin than leaving a high-value witness exposed because of an HOA dispute," DeShawn countered. "Do it." While Olson made urgent calls, wrestling with bureaucracy, DeShawn initiated his own counteroffensive. He wasn't a federal agent anymore, but the instincts and some of the contacts remained. He spent the next few hours on burner phones, calling in old favors, navigating the shadowy pathways of information he had once commanded. He needed dirt on Celia Grant, something to make her back off, something that transcended her HOA kingdom. Meanwhile, the media presence outside his house swelled. News vans with satellite dishes sprouted like metallic mushrooms. Reporters, hungry for a local color story that had suddenly taken on a more intriguing edge, shouted questions whenever they caught a glimpse of movement. DeShawn kept the blinds drawn, the house a silent fortress. Inside the casita, Tina was terrified. The sounds of the media circus outside a constant reminder of her precarious existence. He reassured her via brief, coded texts, promising he was handling it. The first breakthrough came late that night. A former bureau contact, now a private investigator, called back. "Got something on your HOA queen, Miller. It's not illegal, not exactly, but it's damn sure unethical and hypocritical. Remember that Desert Bloom Beautification Fund she's always championing?" DeShawn remembered. It was a slush fund for pet projects within the community, funded by voluntary contributions and HOA fundraising. "Turns out," the PI continued, "Celia Grant's own landscaping company, Grant's Gardens, has been the sole recipient of contracts paid out of that fund for the past 5 years. We're talking inflated invoices, no bid contracts. It's all routed through a series of opaque transactions, but the money trail leads straight to her. She's been lining her pockets with community money while preaching about bylaws and property values." A grim smile touched DeShawn's lips. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it was ammunition. Celia's power rested on her image as a righteous enforcer of community standards. Exposing her as a self-serving hypocrite could shatter that image and, with it, her authority. The next morning, just as a city inspector, flanked by a nervous-looking Celia and 2 uniformed police officers, likely for keeping the peace, approached his property. DeShawn met them at the gate. He was calm, a stark contrast to Celia's barely concealed agitation. The media swarmed. "Mr. Miller, we're here to conduct a preliminary inspection for the demolition," the inspector began, looking uncomfortable under the media scrutiny. There will be no inspection and no demolition today, DeShawn stated, his voice carrying clearly. He held up his phone, displaying a document. This is a temporary restraining order issued by a federal judge, citing ongoing matters of national security related to this property. All HOA actions are stayed for 48 hours. Any attempt to proceed will be considered contempt of a federal court order. Celia's face went pale, then flushed with anger. National security? This is outrageous. This is about a simple code violation. Olson and Davies, who had arrived moments earlier and were observing from an unmarked car, now stepped out, their FBI credentials clearly visible. Olson addressed the inspector and the officers. Special Agent Olson, FBI, we can confirm the validity of the federal order. We suggest everyone step back from the property. The sight of FBI agents sent a fresh wave of excitement through the reporters. The narrative was shifting, deepening. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president anymore. Celia looked stunned, her authority evaporating before her eyes. The police officers, clearly out of their depth, deferred to the federal agents. The inspector retreated. DeShawn then addressed Celia directly, his voice low but audible to the nearest microphones. Mrs. Grant, perhaps we should discuss the Desert Bloom Beautification Fund and the rather lucrative contracts your company, Grant's Gardens, has exclusively received from it for the past 5 years. I have some interesting invoices here that the community, and perhaps the IRS, might find illuminating. Celia's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The carefully constructed facade of the righteous community leader cracked. For the first time, DeShawn saw not just anger in her eyes, but fear. The power dynamic had decisively shifted. He hadn't just resisted, he'd launched a counterattack that struck at the heart of her carefully curated reputation. The hidden truth of her financial dealings was now a weapon in his hands. The war for the casita and for Tina's safety was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn. The silence that fell after DeShawn's accusation against Celia Grant was thick with unspoken implications. The reporters, sensing a far juicier scandal than a mere HOA dispute, pushed closer, microphones extended like metallic snouts. Celia, who moments before had been the picture of indignant authority, now looked trapped, her face a mask of disbelief and burgeoning panic. The federal restraining order had been a blow, but this public exposure of her financial dealings was a kill shot to her reputation. Those are baseless allegations, Celia sputtered, her voice lacking its earlier conviction. Slander! My company has always operated with complete transparency. Transparency the HOA members, and perhaps a forensic accountant, would be very interested in examining. I'm sure, DeShawn replied coolly, holding her gaze. Especially regarding the sole source contracts and the rather significant markups on services rendered to the Desert Bloom community. I have documentation, Mrs. Grant. Would you like me to share it with Channel 7 here? Or perhaps the Albuquerque Journal first? Celia's eyes darted from DeShawn to the eager faces of the reporters, then to Olson and Davies, who watched the exchange with grim neutrality. Her carefully constructed world was imploding. The power she wielded within the HOA, built on a facade of civic duty, was dissolving under the harsh glare of public scrutiny and federal intervention. Olson stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Mrs. Grant, given the federal order now in place and these serious allegations, I suggest you consult with legal counsel. For now, all HOA actions concerning Mr. Miller's property are suspended indefinitely. The FBI will be looking into the circumstances that led to this situation, including any potential harassment or misuse of authority. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Celia Grant, defeated and visibly shaken, offered no further resistance. She mumbled something about contacting her lawyer and practically fled, pushing past the throng of reporters who hurled questions after her retreating figure. The 2 police officers and the city inspector, clearly relieved to be extricated from the escalating drama, quickly dispersed. As the media frenzy began to redirect itself towards the FBI agents, Olson gave DeShawn a curt nod. You bought your time, Miller. and then some. We'll handle the fallout from here, including keeping a lid on the cartel chatter. But you need to understand, this isn't over. Tina Alvarez is still a target. I understand, DeShawn said, but she's safer now than she was this morning. In the days that followed, the story of the Albuquerque HOA war took several dramatic turns. Celia Grant's financial dealings became the subject of an official HOA inquiry, spurred by angry residents who now saw her in a new, unflattering light. Her landscaping company's contracts were suspended, and whispers of embezzlement charges began to circulate. Her reign as HOA president was effectively over. Her fall from grace was swift and merciless. The Desert Bloom Estates HOA, humbled and in disarray, quietly dropped all actions against DeShawn Miller's property. The casita was safe. More importantly, the FBI, with renewed urgency and a clearer understanding of the local threat landscape, was able to quietly and securely relocate Tina Alvarez to a new, fortified, safe house far from New Mexico. Her identity further scrubbed, her safety paramount. The leak within the bureau that DeShawn had suspected was eventually identified and neutralized, thanks in part to the information that surfaced during the intense scrutiny of the Albuquerque events. DeShawn Miller returned to his quiet life, or as quiet as it could be after such a public upheaval. The media eventually moved on to other stories. His neighbors, some apologetic, others still wary, mostly left him alone. He had faced down a petty tyrant and, in doing so, protected a life and upheld a promise. He hadn't sought the confrontation, but when it came, he had met it with the lethal precision of his former rights profession, tempered by a weary desire for peace. A month later, he received a heavily encrypted message, routed through a series of untraceable relays. It was from Tina. "Thank you, Des, for everything. They say I might be able to testify via secure video link soon. Maybe then, maybe I can start living again. You gave me that chance." DeShawn looked out at the casita, no longer a source of contention, but a symbol of a battle won. The New Mexico sun warmed the adobe walls. He hadn't risen to glory. He had simply defended his small patch of ground, and in doing so, helped justice find its path. Celia Grant's ambition and vindictiveness had been her undoing, a classic tale of a villain self-destructing when faced with unyielding resistance and the exposure of their own hypocrisy. He closed his eyes for a moment, the desert breeze carrying the distant scent of roasting green chalets. The quiet wasn't just the absence of noise anymore. It was the sound of a hard-won peace, a peace he had almost lost, and a peace he would continue to protect, one silent, resolute day at a time. The walls of his home, and the smaller one in his yard, stood strong, silent sentinels in the West Albuquerque landscape. A high-stakes showdown between a former agent seeking peace and a ruthless HOA president reaches its climax, exposing secrets and testing loyalties to the breaking point. Thank you for joining us on this gripping journey. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment to let us know what you think about this explosive story.